Well, since you watch our show, you might think that people have learned their lesson about the tyranny of the COVID industrial complex. That's what I'm decided to call it this morning, by the way. That the people stopped taking these untested gene therapy altering shots, but you'd be dead wrong about the whole thing. Just this week alone, the mainstream media is doubling down or pushing COVID shots once again on unsuspecting Americans. Just watch as MSNBC went all out on having an uneducated doctor on, telling that even pregnant women should be going out and getting these shots right now. Watch.
Dr. Adalja, first to you. There is a lot of confusion, as Marissa Para was reporting, around the COVID vaccine. As a doctor, please straighten it out for us.
Yeah, this is the absolute worst case scenario because no one knows who should get a vaccine. No one knows who to trust. What I would say is that if anybody has any high risk condition, they should be getting the new vaccine when it's available. If you are a parent of a child and that child is less than 2 years of age and they have no risk factors for severe disease, even without any risk factors for severe disease, as you just heard, there is a high rate of hospitalizations. Those children should get vaccinated. And lastly, I would say pregnant women all need to be vaccinated with each pregnancy. There will be better guidance coming out from the professional societies, but the CDC guidance is likely to be very, very muddled and more confusing, leading to what's going on with these drugstores not actually offering vaccines.
To me, that's pure evil. But, you do you. They've never been tested on pregnant women. How the hell can you tell pregnant women to go out and get this thing? By the way, not just get one with every pregnancy that you have. Thank goodness our next guests are fighting the good fight to stop this tyranny. John Leake, Dr. Peter McCullough have just co-authored a brand new book called Vaccines, Mythology, Ideology, and Reality. You can buy it now. I just finished reading it last weekend, and holy smokes, is this thing a good book. You guys need to buy this book. I'll have a link in the description. And John and Peter, join me now. Guys, great to have you back on the show. Congrats on the new book.
Thank you.
Thank you.
First of all, just before we get into the book and we dive deeply into this, because it reads to me almost like a history book, just to get your reaction, Doc, I'll ask your reaction, because as the MSNBC anchor there said, doctor, straighten it all out for us. Make sense of this. What did you think of this new push for COVID vaccines here in the fall?
Boy, 5 years into the campaign, essentially no one is taking these shots anymore. The CDC stopped reporting who's taking the shots. They now just give a survey, of what people's intentions are. And 97% of us have been through the illness. It's over with. And you can see now that the comments by the doctor who's at the Bloomberg School of Public Health for Johns Hopkins, a known vaccine promotional unit, heavily funded by Gates Foundation and other, vaccine-aligned entities in this biopharmaceutical complex, you can tell at this point in time, the recommendations are simply unhinged, unending injections of messenger RNA with essentially no goal in sight.
John, your response to seeing that doctor pushing this, I mean, you've done so much work on this book, and then you hear the mainstream media is doing this big fall push again. What do you think, John?
Well, I hope I didn't interrupt. I was so stunned by the precise wording of the doctor. He started by saying, if I remember precisely, so if you have a child under 2 years old who has no risk factors, so, that starts to sound like a qualification. But then he says he too should get it anyway. So it's as though it's some universal idea that just every man, woman, and child on earth should get this. And even if there are any questions that arise, does it really work? Does it really stop transmission? No, just get it anyway. And this is, interestingly enough, the doctor pointed out, this propaganda is coming from Johns Hopkins. I mean, this was Bill Gates's original announcement, or annunciation, I call it. This new vaccine is coming. He made this announcement in April of 2020. And we're all locked down. The world's turned on its head. But when everyone gets it, then mankind will be liberated and saved. And here we are 5 years later, and it's the exact same messaging. This is very characteristic of an ideological representation, just a slogan, just get it, everyone get it. And this really drew us into this story. What is going on here?
So you write, I mean, vaccines, mythology, ideology, and reality, and it really reads like a history book. And it's like, it's without politics. I mean, you really go back to sort of the foundations of these vaccines and even the terminology of the term vaccine, where it comes from. And Peter, it almost sounds like it has become a religion for some people. And I think you saw that last night, or just you're here on an interesting week. We've got all this news happening with COVID. And then you see on CNN the other night, this panel with Abby Phillips going crazy because Florida and Joe Ladapo down there has basically said no more mandates for vaccines in the state of Florida. Like, you can go out and get them if you want. You can get 30 of them if you want. But the government is not going to tell you to do it anymore to go to school. I mean, and people freaked out.
It's as if their religious faith has been shaken. And, we went all the way back to 1721. Cotton Mather, Puritan minister, takes up with Dr. Boylston in this process of variolation. It's an early form of inoculation using a scalpel and a smallpox pustule from one person and inserting it into another through a skin nick. And Cotton Mather, 1721, proclaims this is a gift from God. So there's been connotations of religiosity with vaccination from the very beginning. And then these wild claims, even on the CNN panel, Scott Jennings, who's positioned to be kind of on the right, he's kind of the evening punching bag on that show. He says it's indisputable that the vaccines have saved millions of lives. And there's just no evidence of that being the case. For example, and people bring up measles all the time, that, with measles, Miller published in 1964, probably the best kept measles registry in the world, in the British Medical Journal, the actual death rate from measles. This is before the vaccines. And the rate was 0.2 per thousand. That's 1964. So if we had 500,000 measles cases per year in the United States with no measles vaccine, which could be the caseload, that would be essentially, 1,000 deaths. That's 1964 technology. That's before any measles treatment, where we have immunoglobulins, vitamin A, secondary antibiotics, steroids, ICU care. We should have zero measles death, even with no measles vaccine. Worldwide, a lot of people don't take the measles vaccine. The WHO reports 600,000 cases of measles sometimes in a year worldwide. People are making a big deal when we have 1,000 or 2,000 cases in the United States. But in my view, it's all about treating these illnesses. The vaccines can help reduce case count, but they're not a savior, and they shouldn't be held onto like a talisman.
John, I think one of the things that stood out to me in this book from a history perspective is that nowhere in this book did I feel like, oh my God, thank God we got this one particular vaccine, like polio or smallpox or measles or COVID. Almost in every situation that you guys highlight in this book, it's because of like sanitation. It's because of not having horses take dumps in the street. It's from people washing their hands. It has, in almost every situation that you document in the book, these cases started to fall well before any sort of vaccine rolled out, John, right? I mean, that's stunning for a lot of people, and I think people don't know that, or they're telling themselves a lie about this.
I think that was a key insight that we provide in the book. We just went back and looked at U.S. vital statistics, which is a very straightforward presentation of cause of death in the United States year after year after year. And the doctor mentioned the study in Great Britain just before the measles vaccine was introduced to the UK. The other thing we look at is just vital statistics in the US. And so, for example, measles, it's an extremely contagious illness. Prior to 1963, all American children were presumed to have had it at some point in their childhood. It's that contagious. But if you look at vital statistics in the decade prior to the introduction of the measles vaccine, you're seeing nationwide, in a nation of over 150 million people, about 400 to 450 deaths per year attributed to measles. Now, a lot of those children, we don't know exactly what their comorbidities were, if they had congenital illnesses that made them frail. But this is before the measles vaccine. We're already down to around 400 deaths per year in the whole country. And, just to stay on measles for a moment, we had this death in West Texas of a Mennonite girl. The mainstream media made enormous hay out of this, but we investigated this death. And what we discovered is she was actually recovering from measles with her siblings when she started presenting symptoms of secondary bacterial pneumonia, which wasn't treated. I mean, a simple antibiotic prescription at home would have saved the little girl. And that's just another, it's perhaps a nuanced point, but this kind of cult of vaccinology has been accompanied by a strange lack of attentiveness and perceptiveness and just basic doctoring.
Right. And you also talk about, I mean, Doc, in the book, you talk about really the sacred cow mindset. It's like baked in, like right from the beginning, going back to Edward Jenner, like this idea that it's like something given. You mentioned like it's something given from God. It's this sacred cow idea. And I think there was one story in the book that just absolutely floored me. I don't remember. I think it was she was royalty. Remind me, because my 48-year-old brain here is. But there was. I think she was I don't know if she was a queen or she was a princess or something. I'm trying to remember off the top of my head. She had like, I think she had like 5 kids. She had like 5 kids, and she was giving them this vaccine, this sacred cow, and they like all died. And she's like writing in her journal, like, oh, another one died this weekend. Another one died this weekend. Like, but still championing this. I mean, that's the kind of the fanaticism of these vaccines. Maybe I'm totally wrong on the person. Maybe it was a guy. Refresh my memory.
So that's a very important moment in this story that we tell. Now, this goes back to the 18th century. You're speaking of approximately the decade of the 1780s. That's King George III and his wife, Queen Charlotta. And they had 15 children. Now, we don't know. It would seem that some of their children received this early smallpox inoculation procedure. It was called variolation, which involved taking a small amount of pus from a sick person's smallpox pustule and then transferring it to the arm through a small incision with like a lancet and rubbing the infectious material into the skin, into the wound of a healthy person. They called that variolation. It comes from the Latin variola, which is the Latin for smallpox. So this caught on in the 18th century. Queen Charlotta of England, she was impressed by this idea it would confer protection. But, as we show, there's really no way of knowing, well, was it really protecting children, or could it be, as was definitely the case, and the last 2 boys that were born in her family, both of them contracted virulent smallpox from the variolation procedure very quickly and died. But you see this in her private diaries and letters, as well as King George's, we're going to keep the faith anyway. And the perception seems to be, well, if they'd not died of variolation, they probably would have died of smallpox anyway. But there's really no scientific means of assessing this perception. It was just a sort of an idea. Now, what's notable about variolation is you get to the end of the 18th century, and experiences like that of the king and queen with their 2 little boys, people did begin to realize, maybe variolation's not such a great thing after all. It was right at that time, at the end of the 18th century, that this naturalist, Edward Jenner, comes up with this idea of smallpox vaccination. So in that case, it's not using infectious material from an active smallpox lesion on a human. It's taking infectious material from these blisters that would appear on the udders of dairy cattle and using that as the inoculum. So the word vaccine actually comes from the Latin word for cow, vacca. And this is Jenner's pamphlet, inquiry into the variola vaccinae, which means literally smallpox of the cow. So, as we talk about this in our book, vaccine is a very aptly worded name because it really is, it comes from the cow, and it's the ultimate sacred cow. Yeah.
Peter, you in the book, you mentioned a story, kind of a personal story, how you were really a champion of vaccines. I mean, you hadn't really gone down this rabbit hole in a way. I think maybe if people knew you 20 years ago, you might maybe sing a different song. But you were very, you had a lot of humility in telling your personal story, and maybe you can just kind of recount a little bit of it for our audience here. So when you sort of first discovered, like, this is a religion, like there is no science pushing, I don't know what they're talking about here. I work in this hospital. There should be no reason, if I've already have natural immunity, that I should be getting a shot. Why are you pushing this on me? And I think that led you down a rabbit hole of figuring out where is all this money coming from? Where's the propaganda coming from? Can you maybe talk a little bit about that?
Right. There were the turning points. Listen, like all of their doctors, myself, my wife, my kids, we followed the vaccine schedule. We were taught that it's a good thing to do. There were no lectures in medical school or residency on vaccine safety. There are, to this day, there are no continuing medical education courses on complications after vaccination, as if they don't exist. Wow. And, what I had seen over my career is things had kind of crept in, this kind of authoritarian nature to vaccine administration. So, for instance, the annual influenza vaccine. Now, I'm healthy. I'm reasonably young through my career. I've never even tested for influenza. I've never had anything that was like influenza. My annual risk of influenza, like yours and John's, is way less than 1%. There should be no reason for me to take an influenza shot. So, early on in my career, it was offered, it was encouraged, we would get reminders. But towards the end there, I'm going to say the decade leading up to the COVID pandemic, it became required. And a couple times I remember being told, listen, you can't, go in the hospital on January 1st unless you've had your flu shot. I mean, we're going to lock you out of the hospital. You can't round and see your patients. And it became a big deal. A couple of times I got a flu shot on Christmas Eve in the emergency room. So I was never someone who, was wildly supporting vaccines. I didn't recommend them to my patients. I accepted them like everyone else. And then what happened during COVID is I had COVID early in 2020. And we were seeing, for the first 2 years of the pandemic, we were seeing great natural immunity. People just weren't getting it twice. And because I already had it and they were rolling out these new vaccines, when they called me for my shot, I said, listen, I was the only doctor in my division who had COVID. I said, I've already had it. I was happy. it was over with. And they said, well, no, just take it anyway. And it was just that taking it anyway that just kind of raised my awareness of well, wait a minute. This is something we don't do. We just don't give extra vaccines. The other things that happen in the background, I mentioned it, with this zealotry with the flu vaccination. One of my brother's colleagues, annual flu shot, developed Guillain-Barré syndrome. This is a horrific paralysis. People can be bedridden like this person the rest of his life. And it just in the back of my mind, I started to think, gosh, for a less than 1% chance of something that's treatable, would it ever be worth being paralyzed for the rest of your life? And then I think the capper that really opened my eyes was this now emerging linkage between excessive childhood vaccination and autism.
I'm glad you bring that up. because if you look at the footnotes in your book, a huge chunk of these footnotes, or at least a lot of citations, point to autism. And there's a lot here. And I just want to read, because I was stunned. I mean, I think people are becoming aware of the potentiality here of this, and the fact that we're like not investigating it. And it's sort of, again, a sacred cow, right? The idea that I think you point out in the book is like, we can say we don't know that vaccines cause autism, but we can say that, that a lot of people are saying unequivocally, we can say that they don't cause autism. So wait, what? How can you say that? What sort of research exists that says that they absolutely does not cause autism? Like, where are you getting this from? Just one little story here. It was a vaccine conference, this conference, and it had one individual, Hannah's case. You write about Hannah's case in the book, as if this was like totally settled science. And so this letter came from a family writing about their daughter Hannah. Our daughter Hannah developed normally until receiving 9 vaccines at once. She immediately developed a fever, encephalopathy, if I can say that correctly, deteriorating into what was diagnosed based on the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, or DSM, as autism. Dr. Offit's assertion that even 5 vaccines at once would not place an unusually high burden on a child's immune system, in theory, and risky practice for the toddler's developing brain. No one knows if Hannah's mitochondrial dysfunction existed before receiving these vaccines. Dr. Paul Offit's claim that Hannah had already weakened cells is unfounded. We support a safe vaccine program against critical infectious diseases. We need straight facts and serious science and speedy answers on these important issues. That was part of the opinion piece written by Paul Offit in the New York Times. So 9 vaccines at once, and then she immediately develops a fever and starts deteriorating into what they would diagnose as autism. But if you listen to all these people that are making money from the biopharmaceutical industry, vaccines don't cause autism. They'll tell you. Okay.
I'd like to linger on a few details. So that op-ed submitted to the New York Times, that was written in response to an op-ed that had been submitted to the New York Times by Dr. Paul Offit. He is a very prominent, what I call vaccine propagandist in Philadelphia. And
right.
Dr. Paul Offit writes this letter saying, in the case of Hannah Poling, there's just absolutely no evidence whatsoever that this little girl regressed into autism as a result of this large battery of vaccines. That op-ed that you dictated for our audience, that was written by Hannah's father, who's none other than Dr. John Poling, who's a neurologist at Johns Hopkins. So this isn't some sort of yokel that doesn't know what he's observing. He's actually a trained neurologist who wrote a paper that was peer-reviewed about Hannah's specific case. And not only is Paul Offit so out of line, beyond the pale with all of the wild assertions of his op-ed, which is nothing but the purest propaganda that he wrote. The other thing that Offit just completely ignores is that the United States government acknowledged that Hannah's autism had been caused by the shots, and Dr. Poling and his wife had been compensated for the injury. So this is the thing that we see in this long saga and story. It's not only that the vaccine enterprise has been riddled with wishful thinking and wild gambles and guessing, it's also been riddled with outright fraud, just false assertions, concealment of evidence, suppression of information about things that could gravely harm children. And the instinct and the practice is suppress it, conceal it, don't talk about it. If anybody raises any of this, even if it's a Johns Hopkins neurologist, smear him and attack him in the New York Times. So a lot of this is just chicanery. And if I could just add one last thing, the doctor pointed out that, isn't it funny how in his case, he was PCR confirmed, recovered from COVID-19 illness. And I remember when he had it, he made a Halloween Day video, and he has COVID symptoms. His hospital administrator said, you need to get the shot anyway. And so Dr. McCullough said, no, I've already had the illness. It's actually contraindicated. The shot could actually cause a violent immune response. So that this is not indicated. No, you need to get it anyway. And so if Clayton, if you could show the cover of the book, I just want to point something out that a lot of readers have found remarkable. So that silver coin, that's a 20 euro silver coin issued by the Vatican in 2022, commemorating the COVID-19 vaccine, that the Holy Father said, the Vatican is issuing this coin to commemorate this miraculous technology. Okay, so observe the iconography of that coin. It's like a trinity, three figures. That's an old figure in Catholic iconography going back to the Renaissance. You'll see Raphael pictures, similar figure of three. Now, if you read the Numistic Catalog's description, it says a boy prepares to receive the COVID-19 vaccine. So ponder that statement. A boy prepares to receive the COVID-19 vaccine. That's the identical statement to a communicant prepares to receive the Eucharist.
I was just about to say, it's like a communion. A boy prepares to receive the body of Christ.
So
right.
Communion. So when Joe Ladapo, the Surgeon General of Florida, comes out and says, receiving vaccines is no longer mandatory. They'll be available, but they're no longer mandatory. This establishment of the sort of vaccine orthodoxy, they freak out. Why? It's as though he's made communion optional. You don't have to take communion anymore. You can receive the blessing without actually going through the ritual of eating of the body and drinking of the blood of Christ. You can still receive Christ's blessing without. I mean, this is really, really weird archetypal stuff and I'm not even sure that this sort of holy office for the orthodoxy of vaccines, I don't think they even realize that they've gone down this path of religiosity. I think they probably don't. They probably think they're remaining in the realm of science.
Well, they're labeling them safe and effective. Peter, you were shaking your head the whole time.
I mean, these are stunning observations. John and I, a few years ago, had the privilege of traveling to India. This is a couple of years into the pandemic, and we met with some Indian doctors, and I remember one of them counseling me. He said, when we get to the vaccines, he says, in our culture, he says, I want you to know we kind of consider vaccines like people, and we don't want to insult them.
What does the data show right now, Doc, about vaccine injuries? We talked about autism, we talked about this, but this information has been massively suppressed. Again, we showed you the MSNBC interview. Again, you can watch CNN. You can see all of the Bill Gates backed legacy media pushing these stories. Obviously, you're seeing all the coordinated effort right now to go after RFK Jr. and get him thrown out. We received an email from our pediatrician the other day. We featured it on the show where the pediatrician says we can't give out COVID shots for children under 5 unless they're at risk. To which this pediatrician basically said we're going to go to great lengths, basically almost to massage it, so we'll figure out how you can become high risk. I mean, that was the implication of the email. Like, you're not high risk now, but we'll figure it out. And we're hopeful that the CDC will allow us to start giving these shots back out to children again. We want as many people as they possibly can to get these shots. So the propaganda is in full swing. But I mean, let's talk about vaccine injuries, the suppression of information that you've seen.
The suppression starts by the suppression of reporting. So let me just say, if you're at an academic medical center and you see a patient come in with, a vaccine blood clot or stroke or myocarditis, the classic COVID vaccine side effect, and one wants to do research on it or even write it up as a publication, it's not going to even be approved by the department chairman or research department to even get out the door. And if a paper got out the door and it went to a journal at the editorial level or the editorial board or the reviewer level or the publisher level, likely it's going to be suppressed because everyone took the vaccines and they're worried about what's called vaccine hesitancy. That do you know there's 20 published different scientific instruments to assess vaccine hesitancy? Vaccine hesitancy has become its own mental disease. It's actually bad to be vaccine hesitant in the medical literature. It's good to be vaccine accepting. And, when I analyzed this recently on Focal Points, believe it or not, this is stunning. There are around 350 plus papers in the peer-reviewed literature that have concluded that the benefits of the COVID-19 vaccines outweigh the risks. Over 350, that's cited in the National Library of Medicine. Now, for every intervention, a drug, a surgery, or anything else, there's always going to be a mixture of papers. There are always papers that say, well, the drug is beneficial here, but it's harmful here, and the net effect. Well, you'd expect this for the COVID vaccine. So I did the exact same search, and I said, well, how many papers have concluded that the risks of the vaccines outweigh the benefits? The answer there, 0. 0.
Wow.
So there is complete, now there are plenty of papers that are calling for the vaccines to be removed from the market. There's plenty of papers that have concluded the risks far outweigh any theoretical benefits, but they're being suppressed off the National Library of Medicine server. And so that's greatly influencing any artificial intelligence analyses or others.
All right, but I can just speak to me personally. I'm not a doctor, and I don't play one on television. But you always think when you hear about medical journals and the publication of these studies, to me that's like sacrosanct. Oh my gosh, this was public, and now we're learning that so much of this is politicized and hidden from us that we can't trust it anymore, John.
Yeah, I was going to say. I mean, at the risk of flogging this kind of religious metaphor to death. This is very much like the great religious wars of Europe in the the Reformation and the Counter-Reformation in the 16th and early 17th centuries, where the Holy Office of the Inquisition is just banning prescribed books, saying we don't want anybody to read this. So
you're a heretic.
And so we see this very, very persistent thread that runs through this whole story very, very quickly, already in the 18th century, already with Cotton Mather, the famous Puritan minister in Boston. You see the erection of an orthodoxy, and those who question the orthodoxy are deemed heretics. And I mean, if you think that that's just a metaphorical exaggeration, I mean, consider what happened to Dr. McCullough when he simply started questioning the COVID-19 vaccine. I mean,
right.
It's identical to the way he wasn't burned at the stake on the public square. But
we have that going for us. But he was metaphorically burned at the stake. Banned, blocked, censored. Yeah,
it's true, Doctor. I mean, just quickly run through the litany of you question the safety, and then what happened.
But it's just too painful to do. I mean, there's so much professional reprisal. But look what happened to the people, Clayton. This is very important. People lost their jobs over not taking the vaccine. The arc of their university careers and their future endeavors were permanently changed in many, many cases. People didn't get put in jail in the United States for not taking the COVID vaccine, but they did for not taking the smallpox vaccine towards the end of the 19th century. So listen, it's
this
happened
is a great
before.
point. This is a great point. And I think this is, again, where we come back to the history in the book. We talk about the polio, right? We have this mythology about polio. Oh, my gosh. We absolutely have to take the polio vaccine. Look at FDR. But, of course, you bust that myth wide open in the book, right, Peter?
Yeah, I'll let John pick up on that one. But, I'll just say that this was the polio, the advent of the polio vaccine. That was in the first one in the era of modern media, where things could be amplified through radio and TV.
Yeah, polio is so fascinating. I mean, at the risk of speaking on the technical side for just a moment, it's important for people to understand that polio is universally considered to have long, probably going back to the ancient Egyptians, an endemic illness. That means it had always been circulating amongst all human populations on Earth. What's notable about polio is that in the medical literature, there's no reporting of anything like an outbreak of paralytic polio prior to the 20th century. So there's a kind of something of a paradox with polio, and the most likely explanation is between about the ages of 6 months and 5 years of age, the thought is historically all children were exposed to the polio virus. All of them. It's endemic. It's everywhere. Children are very grubby. They're not very attentive to washing their hands after they go to the bathroom. And the thought is between about 6 months and 5 years of age, all children were exposed to polio for all of history. Now, during this early window of life, if it's a healthy child, he's not susceptible to severe polio illness or paralytic polio. It's only if you have a child who's not exposed to polio virus during this early phase of life and who then is subsequently exposed to it later in life that it can become a dangerous paralytic disease. So we think that what's going on here, I should say what people who've really studied this in depth think is going on. It was already observed in the 30s that polio seems to affect primarily the children of the affluent.
Yes,
so
wealthy kids. Yeah.
What that's suggesting is it was kids that grew up in very affluent, clean environments with soap and water and indoor plumbing and clean water. They weren't exposed to polio virus during this early period of life. But then
so they didn't have the natural immunity, right? So they weren't out in the farms. They weren't just being grubby, as you say.
Right. So most small children are exposed. It's the oral fecal route. They just get exposed to it playing around in a New York City tenement building or on the playground or wherever. But these affluent kids, the thought is that they weren't exposed to polio virus during the early phase of life. Then around the age of 6, 7, 8 years old, parents would take them to the New Jersey shore or to Coney Island or wherever, and they would get exposed to raw sewage going for a swim in the summertime. And it's then later in life that there's a higher susceptibility to paralytic polio. So you see in the late 40s and early 50s, what's characterized is these outbreaks. And it's notable that they would oftentimes peak in the summer, mid to late July, maybe early August, when kids are going swimming. The other possibility is that there were fruits and vegetable stands possibly conveying polio virus from manure and things like that. I mean, there's different theories about why this would spike in the summer, but the point is, the worst summer on record was 1952. Okay, that was our first public health scare in the modern media and environment. 30% of people had television, most people had radios. There's universal reporting in all states of the union on weekly epidemiological data. So there's this polio scare in the summer of 52. Now, I think most people today will be surprised to hear that that worst summer on record, there were 21,000 cases in a nation of, I think, over 150 million of some degree of paralytic polio or lameness of the lower extremities attributed to polio. Now, I'm sorry to keep getting technical, but there was no means of laboratory confirming that. So it's not even clear that all 21,000 cases were indeed polio. For example, FDR, one thought is that may have been Guillain-Barré syndrome, but he became a kind of poster boy for polio. But of that 21,000 varying degrees of paralytic polio, only a tiny percentage wind up in the so-called iron lung. I mean, you're talking about a small handful of children turn up in the iron lung. But that imagery of children in the iron lung absolutely terrified the country. And some people even at the time said they're more frightened of polio than they were of atomic war with the Soviet Union. So what we go through is just a total lack of perspective in any of this. I mean, on any given year in the 40s and 50s, far more children would suffer severe injury or death from car accidents, 10 times more from accidents. But you would never know that from reading the literature about polio today.
Well, it's the same thing. More people die falling in the shower than will ever be killed by a terrorist attack in the United States. Yet we take off our shoes at the airport. We have to pour out 3 ounces of liquid or beyond because, but what are we doing about shower deaths? I've never met anyone that was killed by a terrorist, but this is the kind of fear and propaganda that works so well in modern media. Peter, I want to go back to something you said earlier, specifically about like the suppression of data. And we'll wrap this up in a minute here. I'm just curious. I've been very curious about this. In the early days of the so-called pandemic, I was interviewing people out of Israel, and I was very curious about their reporting system there. And they had a very extensive reporting system. I mean, when you compared it to like our VAERS system in the United States, I think it's safe to say it's lacking when you compare it to what type of reporting was happening in Israel. And if I'm not mistaken, just about everyone in Israel was vaccinated in the massive campaign to vaccinate just about everyone in there. Do we have data yet? Because to me, that's like a petri dish. To me, like Israel is like, do we know, like, what did that do? That mass vaccination program and the data that those doctors and their massive reporting system was really maybe a shining light for the rest of the world. Do you have any insight into that?
Yeah, there's several notable papers from Israel, one in 2020 by Valley and colleagues. This is before the vaccines. This is a very important paper. So with just the virus itself, there was no increase in myocarditis or heart inflammation or damage. So one of the false narratives still held by the American College of Cardiology is that the virus causes myocarditis, more myocarditis than the vaccine. Completely incorrect. That Israeli paper showed it. Another thing that came out in our Senate hearings on May 21st, 2025, is a cover-up, a U.S. public agency cover-up, that our CDC, FDA, and other agencies, even the White House, was in communication with the Israelis. The Israelis already had 62 cases of vaccine myocarditis, and there were 2 deaths. And they knew about this in February of 2021. They were emailing each other in the U.S. agency saying, listen, how do we keep this under wraps? We don't want to discourage anybody from taking these shots. And this was actually kept quiet all the way into the summer of 2021, where finally the CDC and FDA came out and said, the vaccines cause heart damage. And it wasn't until after my testimony as a cardiologist this year did Pfizer Moderna finally update their labels. They're still not fully, disclosing what's happening here. They say the vaccines can cause heart damage, and believe me, they do. I see it every day in practice. But they still don't tell, prospective patients that the vaccines can cause fatal myocarditis. That deserves a black box label. But, in our analysis here, the religion of vaccines and this overriding principle to promote vaccines and to underplay safety is even coming out in the FDA labeling, even with RFK and the new crew there at HHS. They are still covering up the risks of the vaccines.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that as we get you guys out of here. I mean, you saw this sort of flopping back and forth over the past few weeks about we're going to, no mandates. We're going to pull this off, but we're going to have certain mandates for, allow, children with high risk. And it's really sort of mixed messaging on this. It sounds like think about one foot ready to listen to what you guys are saying, and one foot still firmly in the camp of propaganda and big pharmaceuticals. I mean, Bill Gates was just at the White House, and on the same day these guidelines are announced. Like, something fishy is going on here. So as we head into the fall, and people are like watching this and like, I was like on the fence, maybe I'll go, get this vaccine. I mean, what do you say to those people?
Well, I'll tell you, very few people are taking the shots. My estimate now is way less than 5%, or maybe less than 1%. Our CDC won't tell us. I was in the pharmacy yesterday. They have these huge vaccine booths in CVS. Nobody anywhere close to these vaccine booths. Sadly, government dollars are being spent on these messenger RNA vaccines, and they're just being poured down the drain. I think we'd be much better off right now pulling these off the market, and now, turning our attention towards safety, injuries, disabilities, and deaths, the spike protein that's been deposited in the body, and what we can possibly do about this. The Biden administration spent $1 billion on long COVID. They never considered the vaccine contributing to people's illnesses, and not in a single study did they evaluate the spike protein, which we now recognize is the cause of long COVID and vaccine injury syndromes.
I'm glad you brought up spike protein. That was the last question I was going to ask you, Doc, which is, I know recently you've said we've now discovered the spike protein 3.5 years or so later. It was supposed to dissipate within like days or hours when you got the shot, but you found evidence that this thing has continued for years. And what is it doing to the human body?
It's my patient. It's my patient. I'm seeing and examining patients every day, and he participated in research. We've working with a lab in Germany. We can find Pfizer messenger RNA in his blood. We can find fragments of DNA coding for the spike protein, fragments of simian virus 40 promoter enhancer inhibitor, and we can actually find the spike protein circulating in his bloodstream 3.5 years later. We've also sampled skin. This vaccine is out in his skin. This is frightening. There are no human enzymes known that can break down Pfizer or Moderna messenger RNA, and no human enzymes that can break down the spike protein. Fortunately, some natural enzymes we found can break down the spike protein, and so we're advancing that as combination nutraceutical approach. But I'm greatly worried with what we're seeing out of these independent research labs.
John, final thoughts. What are you hoping people will take away from reading this book? Maybe there's someone out there who treats this as a religion, who treats vaccines as a religion. Many of us did. I mean, growing up, you always heard about it. You heard the horror stories about polio and FDR and the iron lung and smallpox and measles and all of that stuff. What are you hoping people will take away from this book?
What I'm hoping that people will take away from it is the recognition that the entire vaccine enterprise has never been about truly rigorous and strict empirical science. And I'll give an illustrative anecdote because I think it's the most illustrative anecdote of all. In October of 2021, there was an FDA deliberative committee contemplating the question, should we approve this new messenger RNA COVID-19 shot for children? And one of the guys on the deliberative committee was the editor-in-chief of the New England Journal of Medicine, a guy named Dr. Eric Rubin, who's also an adjunct professor at Harvard. Dr. Rubin acknowledges the safety signal of myocarditis, particularly in adolescent males. So he explicitly acknowledges the safety signal. And then he explicitly acknowledges that the risk-benefit analysis for young people, for children, is different than the risk-benefit analysis for the old and frail, for whom COVID-19 poses a much greater health risk. So far, so good, Dr. Rubin. But then he says something that I think should just be inscribed on this temple of infamy, which is, the fact of the matter is, we won't know how this affects children population-wide until we just start giving it to them. So gambling, let's roll the die. Let's take this new technology that is only just in the last 15, 20 years been under development. Much of it is theoretical, this molecular technology, and let's just roll the die on all of the children, basically of the world. And I say the world because Rubin knew if the FDA approves this for children in the United States, the licensing agencies in the UK and Australia, throughout the Anglosphere, certainly, and probably in Europe as well, they're all going to approve it for children as well. So this enterprise, what people should take away from the book is when Anthony Fauci says, follow the science, or attacks on me, or frankly, attacks on science, that's propaganda. It's not true. Much of this is not a scientific enterprise. And I'll leave you with one kind of, I think, a pregnant thought. You and I could stand on a balcony on a 20-story building, and we would not debate for 1 second if jumping off the balcony onto the concrete below is going to kill us. We'd both instantly be in agreement. Newtonian physics or mechanics, you will die if you jump off this building. But when it comes to human health and disease, we debate about things. We're unsure. It's multifactorial. It's complex. The only way when it comes to medical matters to get closer and closer to the truth is through open discussion and debate. It's through questioning. It's through analysis. It's through listening to doctors who are making observations in the field. So when Fauci and his cohort says, follow the science, what they're saying is we have elected ourselves as the orthodoxy, and anyone else who questions us should be branded a heretic. And that's what we want to get away from. The purpose of our book is to encourage the world, to encourage our readers. Let's get away from orthodoxy and heresy and get back to discussion, debate, and rational evaluation.
Well, that's what RFK Jr. has said, but of course, they're running him out of town. He's terrible for science. He just wants to question things and make sure that we actually have science associated with all of it. The book is called Vaccines, Mythology, Ideology, and Reality. You can go and pick it up. It's really eye-opening, and it walks you through really the history of where this all started and where did this sacred cow ideology come from in the beginning, and takes you all the way up through, of course, to COVID and the COVID era. John Leake, Dr. Peter McCullough, great to have both of you here. Thank you so much for the great book, and I hope a lot of people will go out and buy it and read it. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.